In 2022, the Boston Celtics made the NBA Finals for the first time in the Jayson Tatum Jaylen Brown era. They would go on to lose in 6 games to the Golden State Warriors, and throughout that run, Jayson Tatum played through injury, which meant at times, because he was more limited, the Celtics would lean on Jaylen Brown more and more often, simply because they need somebody to go to be their primary creator with the limited nature of Tatum's ability to play. Then a year later, in the 2023 Eastern Conference Finals, Jayson Tatum suffered an injury as the Celtics tried to come back from down 3-0, and they went all the way to Game 7, but they would ultimately lose. And once again, with increased responsibility, the entire world was watching Jaylen Brown, and the entire world was later laughing at him and making jokes about him not being able to be a proper creator, not being able to dribble with his left hand. Jaylen Brown was the center of attention for the Celtics for all the wrong reasons. The consensus around him was that this is somebody who was a great option next to Jayson Tatum. But when you had him tasked with being the lead creator, he was responsible for running the offense. He simply could not do it. So if Tatum was to ever get hurt, then the future for this team seemed very, very uncertain, especially if he was going to be out for a season. Things did not look bright for the Celtics in the eyes of a lot of fans. Then, of course, the Boston Celtics, they would go on to win the finals the following year. And that was kind of a redemption for Jaylen Brown. You had moments throughout the playoffs where Tatum was not injured, but very much so inconsistent. One night he would drop 50, one night he might score single digits. You never quite knew. But Jaylen Brown, even if the highs were not as big as a big night from Tatum, he was more consistent for the Celtics throughout that run. He ultimately won Conference Finals MVP and ultimately Finals MVP, bringing the Celtics a ring, the first championship that they would get in the Jaylen Brown Jayson Tatum era. And in some ways, this was a redemption for Jaylen Brown. You see, he had finally gotten the opportunity to be a go-to guy in the playoffs for the Celtics simply because of Tatum being somewhat inconsistent, and he found a way to succeed. He had the individual success and also the team success winning the title. But there was still one question. You see, whilst he was doing that, he was still the secondary option for the squad. He might have been more consistent, but ultimately everybody knew the true franchise cornerstone for Boston, if they were to ever move on from somebody, they would move on from Jaylen Brown far before they moved on from Jayson Tatum. So, yes, he had ironed out some of the criticism when it came to his playoff performances, but not when it came to being the number one option. Not entirely. He had shown what he could do with added responsibility, but he was still playing alongside Tatum. And if Tatum was to go through injury again, we still didn't know how that would look. So he was not yet entirely redeemed. Fast forward a couple years, May 2025. The Boston Celtics are in a playoff matchup in the Eastern Conference semifinals against the New York Knicks. And so far this series, the Knicks are kind of being surprising here by giving the Celtics a run for their money, being more than competitive, having the advantage over them at times, something I don't think a lot of people were expecting. And in game 4, Jayson Tatum goes down with an ACL injury. And that is something you never want to see, especially from such a young guy who was also simultaneously a top 5 player in the league, just about that range, top 10, top 5. And this was kind of the nail in the coffin for the Celtics. They had not been having a great series against the Knicks, but this was what really did them in, and they would go on to lose. And then, with the nature of Jayson Tatum's injury, it felt as though this loss was going to linger. And going into the regular season next year, it felt as though Tatum was probably going to be out the entire year. So the weight of the world was going to be on the shoulders of Jaylen Brown. How would he respond? And the track record to this point, it wasn't great. He had that finals run, that championship run, where he was great, but that was playing alongside Tatum. But whenever Tatum was hurt and Brown had to be the undisputable go-to option for the Celtics, things hadn't quite worked out. In turn, the forecast for Boston was one with a lot of cloudy weather, perhaps a rain shower. Things did not look good for them going into this season A lot of fans forecasted them being a lower tier playoff team, or maybe even a play in team led by Jaylen Brown. Fans were not optimistic about what number 7 could do for the green and white. He very much had limitations as a ball handler. And for that to be your primary creator this year, because Boston, they kind of do their playmaking by committee. And what that means is guys like Derek White, guys like Peyton Pritchard, these are your guards, but they're not going to be tasked with the full playmaking responsibilities. Guys like Jaylen Brown have to step up too. And so that was a major, major question mark for the Celtics going into this year. And that was kind of the biggest talking point about how this Tatum injury would really affect him. And to begin the year, that skepticism seemed to be in the right direction. The forecast seemed to be correct about the year for the Boston Celtics. They began the year 7-7, and things just didn't seem right for either them or Jaylen Brown. It seemed like the consensus that we had drawn years ago was once again proving true. That Jaylen Brown could not be a number one option. That as great as he was as a number two, with his limited ball handling capabilities, he just isn't a go-to guy to win a title. Now he can put up good numbers, but is it going to be the most efficient? Is it going to lead to victories? We weren't quite seeing that. But in the last 10 games, the Boston Celtics have gone 8-2, and Jaylen Brown has really turned things around. As the Boston Celtics have catapulted themselves all the way up to being the third seed in the East as of this recording, Jaylen Brown is averaging 29 points per game on the season. That is a career high. And of course, that is a career high. He's had a lot more opportunity than ever before. So, one thing, that 29 points per game is incredible. I don't want to discredit that. But what I do want to highlight, especially, is his efficiency. We knew Brown would average the numbers, but we didn't know if it would be efficient. We didn't know if it would be consistent. We didn't know if it would lead to victories or if it would be impactful for Boston. But his field goal percentage at 49.6% is the second highest mark of his career. And this is with added responsibility, an added role. And his 3-point percentage is also as high as it has been since 2020. So Jaylen Brown, being tasked with being the undisputed number one option for this squad, something he really failed at in the past, has really improved. And where his value is ultimately is as a scorer. So that's why I highlight those points. Now, with the playmaking of him, 4.9 assists per game to 3.6 turnovers. That has not been great. The turnover to assist ratio has not been pretty. But ultimately, for the most part, Jaylen Brown this year has been, simply put, one of the best shooting guards in the entire league. And after those first 14 games of the year, I didn't really know if that would be the case. But as of recently, these past 10 games, he has really turned things around. He's been really good for the Celtics this season. There was a lot of doubt, a lot of questions, a lot of skepticism surrounding him. But in the wake of all of that, Jaylen Brown, even after a slow start to the year, has turned things around, become my top shooting guard in the league, and been the number one option on Celtics team that is having a great run right now.